Good evening. I'm Ellison Barber in for Tom Llamas. Tonight, on one of the busiest travel weekends for millions of Americans, a serious, severe weather threat. At this hour, storms are on the move, some of which have already spawned terrifying tornadoes. Chaotic moments for people dining at a barbecue joint in El Campo, Texas, as that tornado barreled towards them. Luckily, no one was hurt. That was just one of several twisters touching down in the South over the past 24 hours. Portions of Texas, Mississippi, and Louisiana all experiencing severe weather. And you can see some intense hail hammering parts of Texas. The little balls, see them there, little balls of ice pelting homes and cars just as torrential rains moved through. Mountains out west already getting dumped on and could see up to several feet of snow when this system moves out. The dangerous weather is throwing air travel into an absolute tailspin. Right now, the number of delays continue to climb, and the situation is expected to grow worse this weekend. Millions of people from Houston to Atlanta now bracing for tornadoes, large hail, and destructive winds. All of it could have severe impacts on those major travel hubs. NBC's Marissa Parra starts off our coverage tonight from Hartsfield-Jackson Airport in Atlanta.
That is it. Oh, my God. Here, come inside.
Severe weather on a collision course with some of the busiest travel days of the year. Tonight, twisters reported in Mississippi and Alabama.
Oh my God.
Just one day after a tornado outbreak in the South. Among the 8 reported across Louisiana and Texas.
It's on the water right now.
This one seen in Dayton, an elephant trunk tornado named for its curved and winding bend.
Oh my God. Come on.
Another twister in El Campo, catching terrified diners by surprise. Wind gusts, rain and hail, triggering state emergency resources, and an afternoon ground stop for flights in and out of both Dallas airports. The impacted hubs created a domino effect, leaving hundreds of flights canceled and delayed, and even more frustrated passengers in their wake across the country.
Our plane was just canceled. The crowds, the lines, people's tempers. It's stressful.
But the long waits made the long-awaited holiday reunions even sweeter.
It's all about spending time together.
The South now drying off, but facing tornado risks this weekend as millions in the West brace for severe rain and snow, possibly putting a damper on the record-breaking holiday travel weekend with no signs of slowing. Today and Monday slated to be the busiest days for air travel.
Get here early, like extra early.
A busy and bumpy travel season in the final sprint of the year.
And Marissa joins us now from Atlanta. Talk to us about what you are seeing at that airport right now, and then in terms of the impacts possibly for people who are driving this weekend, what should they expect?
Right. Well, Allison, I can tell you we've been here all week. It's definitely living up to its moniker as the world's busiest airport. But things do seem to have been running smoothly today, relatively speaking, given that this is what TSA predicts as being one of the busiest airport travel days of the entire season. But we also know that for the record-breaking holiday travel season, the majority of people take to the road. So if you are one of those people, we looked at the AAA travel forecast, if you will, and they recommend that if you are going to be among those people, well, you won't be alone. So if you would like to try to avoid traffic as much as possible, try to drive before noon or after 7 o'clock. Allison, back to you.
Marissa Parra, thank you. Turning now to some other breaking news we're following tonight. The New York Attorney General's office releasing this shocking video showing multiple officers kicking and beating an inmate. That individual, Robert Brooks, dying the very next day. NBC's Sam Brock has the latest on the investigation into his death and a warning to viewers. This video is graphic.
Newly released shocking video shows these correctional officers fatally beating an inmate, Robert Brooks. The footage, blurred and redacted by state authorities, shows officers repeatedly kicking and punching Brooks in the legs and chest and trying to jam an object down his throat. New York's Attorney General says Brooks was pronounced dead December 10th, a day after these interactions with correctional officers was recorded.
I do not take lightly the release of this video.
James says the video doesn't have audio because the officers involved failed to properly activate their body cameras. It begins with Brooks being carried inside, handcuffed and face down. He's then raised up, face bloodied, and punched in various parts of his body. Brooks was serving a 12-year sentence for stabbing his girlfriend. His attorney says his death is incomprehensible.
I was there with Mr. Brooks' son and his father and his brother. They all watched the video as well, and I think it was just the overwhelming shock, it was just felt so incomprehensible.
NBC News has not been able to reach attorneys for the 14 people under investigation, but the president for the Correction Officers Benevolent Association adding in a sharply worded statement, the egregious and repugnant action of the officers who committed this heinous and fatal assault does not in any way reflect the values of the vast majority of correction officers, including my members. As far as where things stand right now, 13 personnel are suspended without pay. Another person has resigned as the investigation continues. And Allison, more questions tonight about what led up to that absolutely brutal beating that we just witnessed on video. Back to you.
A lot of questions indeed. Sam Brock, thank you. We have new updates in the Azerbaijan airlines crash that killed 38 passengers earlier this week. U.S. military officials now saying they believe the Russians may have shot down the plane after confusing it for an incoming drone. NBC's Pentagon correspondent Courtney Kuby has the details.
Tonight, new information and new images as the investigation into the fiery Azerbaijan Airlines crash moves forward. This video showing confused passengers, some standing in the aisle after oxygen mask dropped and something appeared to tear through the cabin, peeling away sections of the wall. This man saying he heard a loud bang and began praying. This survivor saying she felt 2 explosions, then saw a man injured by the blasts and panicked. The plane was headed to the Chechen capital of Grozny, but instead crashed into a field in Kazakhstan. Dazed passengers miraculously emerging from the fiery wreckage. Now the U.S. has intelligence indicating the Russians may have misidentified the airliner, believing it was an incoming drone, and shot it down, according to 2 U.S. military officials. Just hours earlier, Russian air defenses shooting down a Ukrainian drone only 70 miles away.
Russian air defense forces in the North Caucasus Federal District, which includes Chechnya, were defending against a Ukrainian military-grade weaponized drone attack, and that involved air defenses being used to shoot down drones.
Holes like these in the fuselage could be the result of an air defense missile exploding near the aircraft, the officials said, sending shrapnel hurling at the plane. Russian officials initially attributed the crash to an apparent bird strike, but today said that Ukrainian combat drones were mounting terrorist attacks on civilian infrastructure in the area. Today, Azerbaijan Airlines said the jet crashed after experiencing physical and technical external interference, and they've suspended flights to several Russian cities as the investigation continues.
The airline referred to technical external interference. Now, that could be a reference to electronic jamming equipment that the Russian military uses to confuse Ukrainian drones. Some of that equipment is actually powerful enough to impact commercial aircraft flying overhead. Ellison?
Courtney Kuby, thank you. Staying overseas and heading to South Korea, where for the second time in 2 weeks, the country's leader has been ousted. The acting president impeached by lawmakers just 2 weeks after taking control following the impeachment of President Yoon Suk-yeol, who attempted to declare martial law. Sky News correspondent Nicole Johnston has this report.
In the rambunctious world of South Korean politics, another plot twist. Parliament has voted to impeach another leader, this time the country's acting president. But some MPs, outraged by the vote, chanted against it. They were upset. Parliament had reduced the threshold for the vote to pass. This meant the opposition could get it through on their own, without support from ruling party MPs. The country's finance minister will now step up as acting president.
What we've been worried about became a reality. It's an unprecedented emergency situation in the Constitution's history. Political uncertainty is threatening our national security. It's now the time to put our best efforts into protecting the national security and the South Korean people.
South Koreans had hoped for political calm after the National Assembly voted to impeach the previous president, Yoon Suk-yeol, 2 weeks ago. It came after Yeol declared martial law, insisting North Korean elements had infiltrated the government. It threw the country into total turmoil. Unprecedented scenes of troops on the streets. Politicians confronted soldiers and scrambled to overturn the law in Parliament. The opposition succeeded, and the declaration lasted only 6 hours. But immense damage had been done, and it is a long road back from here. The impeachment votes of President Yul and acting President Han will be ruled on by the country's constitutional court. This could take months. In the meantime, South Korea is stuck with a caretaker government. There are ongoing investigations into what went wrong and how, on a dark night in the depths of winter, did this country swing from stability to mayhem. Nicole Johnston, Sky News.
Now to the latest on the war between Israel and Hamas. According to Gaza's health ministry, the IDF is targeting one of the last functioning hospitals in northern Gaza, setting fire to the building after allegedly receiving reports of Hamas activity inside. This all comes as ceasefire talks face significant delays, despite previous reports of some progress. For more on all of this, I want to turn over to NBC News correspondent Hala Garani, who joins us now from Beirut, Lebanon. Hala, what else do we know about the patients and the staff inside of that hospital? And in terms of options for medical care for people in the Gaza Strip, it has been limited for quite a while now, but this surely doesn't make the situation any easier for people there.
Well, Ellison, Kamal Adwan was really the last remaining functioning medical complex in the north, and it was forcibly evacuated, we understand, this morning at 7 a.m. local time in Gaza when the Israeli military stormed the hospital and forced the evacuation of staff as well as patients. This is according to sources in Gaza and based on footage shot by our teams inside of the besieged enclave. Well, you can imagine that evacuation of a hospital complex like that one in a war zone as it is being stormed is incredibly difficult and challenging and potentially deadly, with patients on ventilators, for example. Some of the medical staff were arrested. We saw images of them being marched out, stripped as well. And one of the journalists, Ellison, covering the attack on the hospital itself, was also arrested. And we saw a lot of smoke and images posted online rising from the building in the vicinity of the medical complex. Where these patients are going is unclear. There are some reports they were taken to the Indonesian hospital, but that hospital, too, is almost all but completely incapacitated and unable to care for patients, Ellison.
Hala, what have we heard from the IDF about this? And also, has there been any reaction from the international community or nonprofit groups?
We've heard from countries, for example, Jordan has said that it had called the storming of Kamal Adwan a heinous war crime. The IDF is saying, as it has really over the last year plus, that it is targeting these medical facilities because it is claiming that terrorist activity is taking place there. As far as Kamal Adwan is concerned, it is calling it a terrorist infrastructure site. Now, we've reported over the last year plus on IDF attacks on some of these medical facilities, and some of the evidence provided included photos of arms kind of laid out and things like that, but nothing that us as journalists can say with any kind of certainty point to the existence of, say, tunnels or a terrorist infrastructure or some sort of command center. So this is not something that journalists have been able to see. And the IDF says that it will facilitate the evacuation of patients to other hospitals, but so far we have not seen evidence of that either, Ellison.
Hala, there is constantly this discussion about ceasefire and whether or not talks will progress, whether or not some sort of agreement could be made. Any indication that there is meaningful progress and that we are possibly inching towards some sort of ceasefire in the future?
So unfortunately, the short answer is no, because as you mentioned in the intro, Benjamin Netanyahu had told the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, that there had been, quote, some progress toward a deal. But then both sides started accusing each other of putting up obstacles and roadblocks. Hamas, for example, is saying that Israel is reneging on some of its promises to withdraw militarily from the Gaza Strip. But then we saw the Israeli defense minister at the Philadelphia corridor site, which is that narrow narrow strip of land between Gaza and Egypt, saying that Israel will maintain full security control of the strip. Israel is saying that Hamas is backing out on some of the promises it made. It could be with regards to the release of hostages. We know that a first phase would include the release of 40 live Israeli hostages. So right now it doesn't seem as though the two sides are reaching an agreement on getting a deal done, Ellison.
Hala Garani, great reporting as always. Thank you. We appreciate it. Welcome back. New Year's Eve drone shows in at least 3 different cities have been called off following a serious accident that sent a 7-year-old boy to the hospital in Florida. The FAA is suspending a waiver that allows the drone operator to fly over crowds at night as it investigates what went wrong. NBC's Adrian Broaddus has the latest.
Tonight, highly anticipated New Year's Eve drone shows throughout the country have been canceled after a holiday drone disaster in Florida sent a 7-year-old boy to the ICU, where he spent Christmas Day fighting for his life.
This should not happen. No family should be going through this.
The FAA confirming it has suspended a waiver that allowed the operator of those drones, Sky Elements, to fly drones at night and over people.
Oh, no. I don't think they're supposed to be calling.
The suspension comes as authorities investigating the December 21st incident in Orlando, where several drones operated by Sky Elements collided and plunged to the ground. One of them hitting Adriana Edgerton's 7-year-old son, Alexander.
My daughter found my son on the floor, unconscious, blood coming out his face. The drone hit him so hard in his chest that it messed up one of the valves in his heart.
Edgerton says the impact forced doctors to perform emergency heart surgery. On Thursday, she posted a photo of her son awake and upbeat. The New York Road Runners, who host a midnight run through Central Park, now canceling a 500-drone spectacle that Sky Elements was set to produce, writing in a statement it was, quote, due to circumstances out of our control. Organizers of New Year's Eve shows in Dallas and Myrtle Beach also pulling the drones from their programming. Sky Elements, which has helped the NFL host drone light shows, says it's, quote, diligently working with the FAA and that the well-being of our audience is our utmost priority.
And Adrian Broaddus joins us now with more. Adrian, what is the alternative here? Have drone shows been replaced with other types of entertainment?
Hey there, Ellison. Some cities and venues are exploring alternative types of entertainment like fireworks and laser shows. For example, the New York Road Runners told NBC News they are looking at other elements for entertainment that will, quote, surprise and delight the runners. So the drones are canceled, but the show must go on. Ellison?
Adrian Broaddus, thank you. When we come back, the new warning from the CDC about the bird flu outbreak. The agency says the virus may have mutated inside of a patient who is severely ill. So could this mean it will become more transmissible? We'll walk through what you need to know with an infectious disease expert right after this. Back now with Top Stories news feed, and this just in. President-elect Trump has asked the Supreme Court to put a pause on a TikTok ban. Lawyers for Trump asking the justices to consider a stay on the law that would ban the social media app on January 19th unless it is sold by its Chinese parent company ByteDance. The Supreme Court is due to hear arguments on the case on January 10th. And new details tonight on that stowaway who managed to board a flight in Seattle without a ticket. A source telling NBC News the woman was able to bypass security by walking under the stanchion of a podium that was unmanned at the time. The Delta flight crew realized the woman did not have a boarding pass as the Honolulu-bound flight was preparing to take off. The TSA and SeaTac Airport say they are investigating. And a fire breaking out at one of New York's most popular holiday markets. Video shows flames engulfing a kiosk at Bryant Park's holiday market, sending thick plumes of black smoke into the air. Firefighters rushing to the scene, quickly extinguishing the fire. Luckily, no one was hurt. A nearby kiosk and the ice skating tent sustained some minimal damage. Fire officials say hot cooking oil might be to blame. And call it a Christmas miracle for one Indiana couple. The duo cashing their $1 million winning Powerball ticket just 5 hours before it was going to expire. According to the Indiana Lotto officials, this couple found the winning prize, their little ticket, stuck between the seats of their car on Christmas morning. They say they learned about an uncashed winning ticket thanks to news coverage and signage at a local gas station. Now to top stories, health check, and the latest on the bird flu outbreak we've been closely monitoring. Tonight, the CDC warning that the virus has mutated within a severely ill patient, raising concerns that it could become more transmissible to humans. According to the CDC, this patient, who is over 65 and does have an underlying medical condition, has been hospitalized in critical condition with severe respiratory symptoms after coming into contact with infected birds. And samples from that patient, they say, suggest that the virus may have mutated inside of them. That case, one of at least 65 reported cases of bird flu across the United States, according to the CDC. So for more on what all of this means and what it might mean for you and your family, I want to bring in Dr. David Aronoff, an infectious disease expert and professor of medicine at Indiana University. Dr. Aronoff, thanks so much for joining us. Let's just start with the question I think most people have. How worried should we be about this mutation? Does it mean that this is something your average person needs to worry about when they're venturing outside and around other people and or other mammals?
Well, thank you for having me on. Obviously, we're learning a lot about the bird flu. And as you pointed out, there's just under 70 cases in the United States. This particular case was one that a person got infected with poultry on their own property and is severely ill. We don't know a lot of details about the case, but some of the virus particles in that person's body have exhibited changes from the virus that was found in the poultry flock that infected them. And it's not uncommon for viruses to mutate or adapt to the person in which they are causing an infection. But the good news is that those mutations do not appear to be mutations that are involved in transmission of the virus or risk of getting the virus from an animal to a human. And I think it's important for all viewers to know that nobody has seen any bird flu transmission from a person to a person during this time. So far, there are no cases of human-to-human transmission.
So explain to us in kind of baby science terms how that could happen and kind of the likelihood of it, right? Like I think often hear about zoonotical infections and we think, okay, we can't be touched with that. But then there are kind of what feels like gray areas to people who don't study this all the time. So in terms of this idea of could it mutate to then go human to human, and are we on the cusp of some sort of pandemic? In simple terms, break it down for us. How and why does that happen when it does? And how do we know if it gets to the point of maybe we should be worried?
Well, influenza is a virus that circulates in humans and in animals. And typically, the strains of flu that we find in birds or pigs or cows are different from the influenza viruses that circulate in people. But influenza viruses can intermingle and they can swap their genetic material. And a virus that's been living in birds can all of a sudden become a problem in human beings. We remember the 2009 swine flu, a virus that had its background as a pig influenza. Right now, the H5N1 bird flu that we're hearing about has not changed in such a way that transmission from person to person can happen. But we do have to have our radar up for cases of human-to-human transmission. We learned in 2009 that we can still get influenza pandemics. And of course, our experience with COVID tells us that we really have to be vigilant as a society around being prepared for pandemics. But right now, this bird flu is not posing that threat.
Dr. Aronoff, we reported yesterday on a voluntary recall of cat food that was manufactured in Portland, Oregon, after it was contaminated with the virus. And according to health officials in that state, at least one cat died after eating the contaminated cat food. Should people be worried about their pets right now? And how do you know beyond that voluntary recall and contamination, which we have information on NBCnews.com about which food products need to go if you have them, but should people be worried about their pets?
Well, one thing I'll say is that pets, just like humans, can get infections from eating undercooked or improperly prepared food. So, for example, raw milk is a risk factor for getting infected with this bird flu, and that's true in humans and in pets. This particular recall involved raw turkey. So it's important that our pet owners know that just like for human beings, we should be serving our pets food that is properly cooked and prepared. And this cat was absolutely a 100% indoor cat that got infected, and they know that it came from this cat food. So if you're feeding your cats a raw, uncooked meat product, check with your pet food supplier or your local veterinarian about whether this is one that's been recalled. And of course, as you mentioned, NBC is allowing some information about this particular product.
All right. Dr. David Aronoff, thank you so much for your time and insights. An infectious disease expert and professor of medicine at Indiana University. We appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you.
Turning now to Top Stories Global Watch and the question for millions of Syrian refugees around the world. Is it safe to return home? The fall of Syria's dictator Bashar al-Assad has reopened the possibility of going back, but at what cost? And are things really going to get better? NBC's Danielle Hamamdjan spoke with Syrian refugees who are now weighing their options.
These are some of the images that defined the 2015 Syrian refugee crisis. They escaped the civil war, tried to make their way onto European soil and beyond, seeking asylum. So many dying along the way. Among those who attempted the perilous journey was Imad al-Arnab. He eventually arrived in the UK with $15 in his pocket and knowing a thing or two about how to make good hummus. He went from washing cars in London to owning a popular Syrian restaurant in the heart of the city, an idea that was too wild to even dream.
Your journey takes you from Syria to Turkey to Greece to Macedonia, Serbia, Hungary, Germany, Austria, France, the UK, and now to one of the most recognizable streets in London.
I had my wife, daughters, family, which is the most important part. When you lose almost everything, you start thinking about what is important and what is not important. I am so happy person. I am so grateful person.
Grateful to the UK that took him in, but Syria is no longer the same country he left behind.
And then suddenly, I cannot wait to go back. This kind of happiness, I'm terribly sorry, but you will never ever understand, because it's stunning. You know, it's not like you had your restaurant back or your house back or your cars back. No, you had your country back.
But not everyone's so keen to go back. From the Syrian capital of Damascus nearly a decade ago to this German city known as Little Damascus, Aref Al-Farouk came here as a child. He keeps in touch with family and friends in Syria, but going back to live there, that is out of the question. I grew up here, he says, and Germany is my second home. In an airport turned shelter in Berlin, the thought of going back is appealing, but not yet safe. We'd like the German government to be patient with the people, he says, at least for a year so we can see how things develop. Maybe we'll go back on our own. Their homeland might be free, but there's often no physical home to go back to. 13 years of civil war have left much of Syria in ruin, with 90% of the population living in poverty, according to the UN. 6 million Syrians became refugees, with Germany taking in nearly 1 million asylum seekers back in 2015. They built a new life here. And in a country with a shortage of skilled labor, the health sector now depends on thousands of Syrian doctors. But Germany is also seeing the far right gaining ground. The suspect in the Magdeburg Christmas market attack that killed 5 people was from Saudi Arabia, amplifying calls from the anti-immigration AfD party for the deportation of immigrants. Meanwhile, Austria is not only preparing a deportation program, it's offering Syrian refugees a cash incentive of $1,000 to go back. The UN is warning Syria does not yet have the infrastructure required for the mass return of its people.
We want the return to be voluntary, to be secure, and to be sustainable as well, so that when they return, that they can stay and not be displaced again, either inside Syria or again having to flee the country.
Does Syria emerge from a dictatorship to a democracy, or does it descend into a power struggle between anti-Assad groups? Imad Al-Arnab has no doubt.
For you, it's no one knows about what. For us, if we get rid of Assad, we can do anything. Anything. Sky is our limit.
The UN says more than 50,000 Syrians have returned to Syria since the fall of Assad. But millions are waiting to see what happens next. Danielle Hamamjan, NBC News, London.
Thanks so much for watching Top Story. In New York, I'm Ellison Barber for Tom Llamas. Stay right there. More news is on the way.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.